I am not an expert on this subgenre or any of these bands, so please remember that when I inevitably get something wrong or I forget a band that you really like. I'm still discovering this music too, so just put your comments down there and I'll read all of them, I promise. I am just a fan of this sound and I'm telling the story from my perspective. But if anyone watching this has any knowledge on the subject, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is in the description. It is incredibly hard to make music that is interesting these days, much less something original, especially in a genre as pretentious and rule heavy as punk rock. Sometime in the last 5 or so years, a new sound began to brew up, as far as I can tell, in France, with a strong focus on melody and often a dark undercurrent running just beneath the thuggish surface. These modern street punk bands are developing a new sound, oi froid, or cold oi. The music sounds kind of like some skinheads were listening to Coxbar, Last Resort, Sham 69, and then they switched it up, started listening to The Cure, The Smiths, and Joy Division. Then these same people start punk bands, and their wires get all crossed, and we get some kind of amalgamation of new wave, post punk, oi, and street punk. At first, it was a sound that threw me off a little. Oi music and skinheads usually go hand in hand with upbeat, rude boy, two-tone ska and reggae, not the melancholy sounds of the 80s goth and new wave. But it didn't take long at all before I couldn't get enough of this new sound. I even found out that some of my friends' bands are making this stuff. So for the last couple of years, I've been sifting through hundreds of bands and albums, compilations, to find the best of this new punk rock subgenre. It's a refreshing take on the music I have loved so much over the last 30 years, and I feel like you also need to know about it. How did all of this begin? I don't exactly know, but I remember when goth types were the target of punks and skins in the early 90s, as far as I know, back in the 80s as well. I find it incredibly interesting that these two genres would ultimately blend together to give us a new sound in the 2020s, as the testosterone driven temperament of the skinhead couldn't be further from the emotional, intimate attitude of early goths. Let's go back to the early days and meet the first band, the one that, more than any other, and possibly unconsciously, merged the aggro attitude of the skinhead with a darker, somber sound. Blitz. With a perfect balance of street-like vocals in the Oi tradition laid over almost dark wave sounding music. Blitz, with this song specifically, may have been the genesis of this particular sound, but it was more or less an exception and not the rule in that scene. Most, and by most I mean almost all, Oi bands weave two-tone ska and reggae sounds into their music, as that is where their style and culture ultimately comes from. The groundwork of this new sound was laid over a decade later by a band called Paris Violent, who in the late 90s began to merge Chaos Records era Oi with the atmosphere of 80s European cold wave, a term then mostly unknown outside of France and oddly enough Poland. Likely it was largely the work of UVPR that enabled this development. Initially an orthodox oi zine and label, over time it broadened its taste to embrace the rainy post-punk and anarcho sounds from its native Breton shores. Soon, the music scenes began to mix and cross-pollinate, and I'm sure the reappraisal of Blitz's Second Empire Justice helped as well. Today, we have arrived at a point where you might just hear a cold wave or dark wave DJ set after an oi gig instead of a reggae one. Even though a band as important as Blitz made some of this music in the 1980s, and then Paris Violence popped up with some of it in the 90s, the sound really didn't get moving until the late 2010s or early 2020s even, where it is now starting to come into its own as a subgenre of oi. It seems like the French version of oi has always had a more melancholy sound than the traditional UK stuff, with a heavy emphasis on clean channel guitar with reverb, a darker tone in general, harder riffs, and a more gruff vocal style. It's just now seeming to catch on around the rest of the world in a big, big way. I have compiled a list of bands that I personally feel are the most notable for one reason or another when discussing Oi Foi. Camera Silens. the longest running band in this subgenre. Camera Silens are a French punk band from Bordeaux, active between 1981 and 1988, alongside bands like Common Turn Sect and Snicks. Although they only played live shows initially and appeared on the Chaos in France compilation, their debut LP, Reality, was self released in 1985. To say this record is a masterpiece would be an understatement. It is perfect front to back, maybe a top 3 album in the entire genre for me personally. I will be making another video detailing this band's history real soon. Syndrome 81 started out as a two-piece project for Damien on vocals and Jackie on bass. But before their demo was even recorded, they had recruited a few friends, and Syndrome 81 was officially a band. Based out of France, they play a perfect blend of US hardcore, oi, and post-punk. Their first full-length album, called Prisons Imaginaires, was released in the summer of 2022 and is incredibly popular. I have personally sold like 6 copies at my record shop in Houston. That album is fantastic. 13 songs and 31 minutes, and every second of it is great. Kron. They are a punk band formed in 2018 in Paris and the surrounding suburbs. Kron may be best described as Criminal Damage meets Blitz, with angry singing and very committed lyrics. In addition to their debut EP and LP, they are also part of the compilations Oi the Album Volume 2, released in 2019, and Paris on Oi, released in 2022. Once again, the French Oi scene shows why it's been at the top of the game for a few years now with this band. Musically, they have that haunting post-punk sound that bands like Kronstadt and Syndrome 81 also deliver. Think simple guitar melodies dripping with reverb, and at times wouldn't sound out of place on maybe a Joy Division song. Add to that some shouted female vocals, and you get one of my personal favorite bands from this entire genre. Their full-length album is outstanding and will surely end up a modern-day classic of this type of music, or more likely just a standout amongst 2020 punk rock as a whole genre. Bromure. Starting in 2016, Bromure are another cold oi band, but they have one specific thing that sets them apart from the pack a little bit. Not only do they play at a higher tempo, but they follow in the footsteps of bands like X-Ray Specs and incorporate a saxophone into their music. It brings a different dimension to their sound, and it keeps them a fresh option in a sometimes monotonous genre. Their self-titled album from 2018 is what I am most familiar with, and it's an absolute banger. I highly suggest that you go check it out. Litige. Litige is a great punk rock band based in Lyon, France. These 3 girls and 1 guy bring something very fresh and inspiring that they sing half in French and half in English. As punks, Litige are first and foremost a band carrying a socially aware message about feminism, politics, personal traumas, and anything that's wrong in the world. But they convey all that angst in a way that is more personal, uplifting, and poetic at the same time. A band that is upbeat, refreshing, and full of heart. They add a little pop punk to the mix of these other sounds, in my opinion, as well. Maybe it's the vocal style when they're singing and not yelling. I don't really know, but I genuinely enjoy it. All of these bands have little things that they do that make them stand out. With a genre so young like this, you haven't really started hearing copycats yet, and I absolutely love it. Kronstadt. Coming from Lille, France, this is the first band that I was obsessed with in this genre. Their album from 2021 is a banger front to back. Got a little more rock and roll mixed in the moody sounds of the post-punk acts that inspire these bands. A little more intricate guitar and a fuller production. But they still have that sound, that almost sad or gloomy sound that we're looking for with this kind of music. They got great gang vocals, excellent songwriting, production's on point. It's like if the Bouncing Souls were a cold oi band. It would sound like this. I feel like their songs could be in the closing of a super dark goth type movie or during the credits of a romantic drama. The album in its entirety is excellent, and I've listened to it front to back multiple times. Litovsk. Hailing from Brest, France, these guys lean more into the post punk side of all this, with a lot of clean channel guitar and a clean monotone vocal style. Oddly enough, he also sounds kind of like Greg from Bouncing Souls, drenched in reverb now that I think of it. Very appealing to the pop punk and goth crowd, I would think. Solid band that I really enjoy. They can satisfy you when you're in the mood for less yelling and more melody. Bullshit Detector, an anti-racist oi foi band from Texas. These guys are my friend, and I have worked with them on my label and will continue to do so. Bullshit Detector is fronted by Richard, who also plays guitar in the Houston oi street rock powerhouse Liberty and Justice. They've leaned into mixing traditional oi with the dark sounds of post-punk as well as any other band that I can think of. They use the sandy sounding snare drum and clean channel guitar with lots of reverb to back up Richard's growling melodic vocal style while he tells stories of hard work, friends lost, risks taken, and then they turn around and cover Bob Seger. I mean, if that doesn't make you want to listen to this band, then you're out of your mind. They're one of my favorite bands, regardless of genre. With a full length record and a couple 7 inches and tapes already out there, and then a couple releases coming this summer, Bullshit Detector are primed and ready to take over the world. For such an abrasive sound, they are incredibly catchy, and you can hear the feeling coming through your speakers with every note played and every word barked. This subgenre is very young, like I had mentioned before, and there's not a ton of bands out there yet that represent this sound. But here are a few bands that, while not cold oi bands, have been linked to that scene for one reason or another. Reeks. Traditional non-British European oi. Fast and pissed. Sounds like a modern version of the Italian band Nabat. They get lumped in because they're French, I think. Some of this stuff sounds similar upon first listen, but the more you get into it, the more you can tell the differences. It's usually the little things, but this band is absolutely great, and you should check them out as soon as you can. Beton Armé from Canada. Not sure if these guys are skinheads or just a French oi band from that part of the world, but it's great music, and I see a lot of the same imagery that those bands and people use. They're a solid French Canadian oi band that I was hearing a lot about within the same conversations as the cold oi bands. Maybe because they sing in French? I don't know, but they're really, really good. Concrete Elite. Mostly associated via their sharing members with Bullshit Detector and their split record with French Canadian Ultra Razia, the San Antonio, Texas Concrete Elite are a straight up in your face hardcore oi band. Awesome music, man. Please go check these guys out and support some of this Texas shit. Empire Down from Minneapolis, Minnesota. These guys pal around with Bullshit Detector as well, and they've released music with Liberty and Justice and a cassette tape on my label. You can see they're headed in this direction with not only their artwork, but with some of the stuff on that split and cassette. I've heard some of the unreleased music from them, and I can assure you that they will have at least some songs that fit into this category. They're just a great band and one that I personally love and recommend you check out. Coupe George. A little heavier and faster than the other bands on this list, dipping into almost metal at times. Coupe George is also French. They come at you with an urgency and ferocity that some of these other bands don't have. They have one of the best bass tones that I've heard in quite a while. I don't know a lot about this band, but they needed to be mentioned because they have one of the best albums from this part of the world. Honestly, they have the least amount of melancholy sounds in their music. They're almost a straight hardcore band, but they're really good. So go check them out. Their song Vengeance is a standout in my opinion. Soft Kill from Chicago. Not an oi band, but they are kind of adjacent to the skinhead scene and seem to be popular among that crowd. Much more than just a thumping post-punk sound laced with synths. I've seen them live and I enjoyed it very much. There were lots of skinheads in attendance. Homefront from Canada. Like Softkill, Homefront is not an Oi band and have nothing to do with skinheads, but they have had strong support from that scene. Some of these bands have covered skinhead songs or had a skinhead do guest vocals on a track, and then they get some love from that scene while not really being of the same ilk. Solid band, in my opinion. They're like a heavier version of Softkill, kind of like if The Cure hadn't leaned into the darker pop sounds and just added a synth and dark tone to a more punk rock sound. It's really good stuff. I enjoy Homefront quite a bit. Go check them out. So there you have it, an introduction into a new subgenre of Oi music. I think it's a pretty refreshing take. I don't, again, have all the information about all of these bands. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I really enjoy this music. All of the bands that I talked about are bands that I have purchased things from. I've I would see them live if I can. I've seen a couple of them play live. They're all people that I know and talk to. I love this music. I've never faked and acted as if I was a skinhead. I'm just a punk rock guy. But the older I get, the more important Oi music has become to me. Mostly it's the lyrical content. It resonates with me at this point in my life. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. I worked hard on it. I got more things coming in the future. If you want to support the channel, you can check out my Bandcamp where I have my label stuff, my Patreon where we have you have input on the channel. We have an exclusive Discord, and we have some unreleased material over there. Or you can just watch the video, like them, comment, subscribe, share them, all that stuff. Either way, I appreciate it. This channel is growing, the community is growing, and I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it didn't disappoint. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, peace.